I still remember the sound of her laughter before I saw her face. It echoed from the kitchen, warm, alive, and full of that careless energy I hadn't felt in years. I hadn't seen my Auntie Miriam in almost a decade. Growing up, she'd always been that free spirit in the family, the one who wore red lipstick when everyone else thought it was too bold, who danced barefoot at weddings, and who didn't care what people whispered about her. When she arrived that weekend, it was supposed to be a simple family visit. My mother had insisted we all gather since it had been years since we'd been in the same house. My wife, Lisa, had spent the morning cleaning every corner as if we were hosting royalty. She didn't know Miriam well, just stories of her from family gatherings, always described as a little too playful for her age. But I knew better. Miriam had a presence that could melt tension the moment she entered a room. She smiled with her whole face, and when she hugged you, you felt it down to your bones. That evening, as we all sat around the table eating dinner, I couldn't help but notice how she still commanded attention effortlessly. Her stories made everyone laugh, even my usually reserved wife. When the dishes were cleared, Miriam leaned back in her chair and looked at me with that same mischievous glint she used to have when I was a teenager. "Let's play a game," she said, sipping her wine. Lisa laughed. "What kind of game?" "A truth game," Miriam replied. "It's something I used to play with friends. No cards, no dice, just honesty. Everyone picks a number, and whoever's turn it is answers a question, truthfully." It sounded harmless enough. We all agreed, maybe just for fun. But as the game began, I realized Miriam wasn't interested in lighthearted truths. Her questions cut deeper, personal, emotional. "What's something you've never told your spouse?" she asked Lisa. My wife shifted uncomfortably, laughed, then said, "That sometimes I miss how things used to be. Before work, before all the stress." Everyone laughed it off, but I could see in Lisa's eyes that it wasn't just a joke. When it was my turn, Miriam's eyes stayed fixed on me. "What about you?" she asked softly. "What's something you've hidden because you were afraid it would change how people see you?" Her voice was steady, but her gaze felt like it stripped away every layer I'd built to keep myself safe. I hesitated. Maybe it was the wine. Maybe it was the way she asked. But I answered honestly, that sometimes, I feel invisible. Like life just became a list of responsibilities. The room went silent for a second, and Miriam didn't break eye contact. "That's fair," she said finally. "We all wear masks. Sometimes the people closest to us don't even notice when they start to crack." Later that night, when everyone had gone to bed, I found her sitting on the porch, wrapped in a light shawl. The night breeze carried the scent of rain in her perfume, something floral and faintly nostalgic. "You spoke from the heart tonight," she said, glancing at me. I nodded. "You asked the kind of question no one's ever asked me. Maybe no one dared to," she replied, smiling faintly. "We talked for hours, about life, choices, and regrets." Her voice carried a kind of wisdom that comes from surviving heartbreak and still learning to love the world. There was no judgment, just understanding. When she laughed, it felt like a bridge between who I was and who I'd forgotten to be. That night, I didn't realize her simple game would unlock something much bigger. Something that would make me question not just my marriage, but the very meaning of loyalty, love, and family itself. As the crickets hummed and the world slept, I remember looking at her and feeling something shift quietly inside me, something both dangerous and human. And in that moment, I understood what she meant when she said every truth has a consequence. I woke to the faint sound of laughter drifting from the kitchen. The sunlight was spilling through the blinds in gentle stripes, cutting across the floor in soft, golden bars. For a few seconds, I lay there, disoriented, half expecting the night before to have been a dream, that intimate honesty, those piercing questions, that look in Auntie Miriam's eyes that lingered too long to be casual. But it wasn't a dream. Lisa was still asleep beside me, her back turned, one hand tucked beneath her pillow. The silence between us was familiar, the kind that didn't come from anger, but from years of quiet distance. I slipped out of bed and followed the sound of laughter to the kitchen. Miriam was there, barefoot, wearing one of my mother's old aprons and humming to herself as she flipped pancakes. The morning light kissed her hair, and for a second, I forgot she was, Auntie, anything, she looked almost timeless. "Morning, sleepyhead," she said without turning around. "Coffee's ready. I made it strong. I remember you never liked it weak." That she remembered such a small thing from so many years ago did something to me. It wasn't flirtation, it was care. A kind of attention I hadn't felt in a long time. "About last night," I began, my voice low, uncertain. She glanced at me, smiling knowingly. You mean the game? Don't overthink it. Sometimes truth needs a place to breathe. I nodded, pretending that was all it was. But I couldn't shake the image of how she'd looked under the porch light, her eyes carrying both mischief and compassion. As we ate breakfast, Lisa joined us, cheerful, oblivious. She thanked Miriam for the meal, kissed me on the cheek, and talked about her plans for the day. Everything was normal. Yet, beneath that normalcy, something in me had shifted. It was like the night's conversation had opened a hidden door in my chest, and no matter how much I tried to close it, I couldn't. Later in the afternoon, the rest of the family went out to the market, leaving just the two of us at home. Miriam was sorting through old photo albums in the living room, smiling at faded pictures. I sat nearby, pretending to read. You were always the quiet one, she said suddenly, flipping through a page. Always watching, rarely talking. Your eyes said more than your words ever did. I laughed softly. You still read people too easily. It's a habit, she replied. Comes from caring too much. Her tone softened, and something in her eyes changed, not inappropriately, but deeply human. It was the look of someone who understood loneliness, someone who had seen too many unspoken moments pass between people who loved each other but forgot how to say it. She leaned back, closing the album. You know, families pretend a lot. We pretend we're fine, we pretend we're close, we pretend love is enough. But sometimes, it's the pretending that ruins us. I looked at her then, really looked at her, and realized why she had always been the odd one out in the family. She didn't know how to fake connection. She either felt it completely, or not at all. I think that's why your game worked, I said. You don't let people hide. Miriam smiled faintly. Maybe, or maybe I just like reminding people that truth isn't the enemy. Outside, the wind stirred the curtains. There was silence, heavy but not uncomfortable. A silence filled with understanding, a wordless recognition that something unspoken existed between us now. That evening, when the family returned, everything resumed as if nothing had changed. But it had. Every glance, every pause carried new weight. Before heading to bed, Miriam passed by me in the hallway. She stopped briefly, her voice barely above a whisper. Be careful with your heart, she said. Once it starts remembering how to feel, it doesn't forget easily. I didn't sleep much that night. Her words replayed in my mind like a quiet song, soft and haunting. I didn't know what she truly meant then, whether it was a warning or an invitation, but I knew one thing. Something in me had awakened, and it wasn't going back to sleep. That was the beginning of everything that followed, the subtle unraveling of what I thought family meant, and the start of a truth I would spend years trying to understand. The next morning, the air felt heavier than usual, like it carried something unsaid. I could hear my wife and mother talking in the kitchen about errands and groceries, their voices weaving through the house like background noise. But I wasn't listening. My mind was still replaying Miriam's words from the night before. Once the heart remembers how to feel, it doesn't forget easily. She was right. Something inside me had woken up, and now it refused to be quiet. Lisa asked Miriam to accompany her to the market, but she declined, saying she wanted to take a walk and clear her head. I offered to drive her, mostly out of politeness, but part of me wanted the excuse to be alone with her again, away from the small talk, away from the others. She looked at me for a moment before agreeing. A short drive sounds nice. The car ride started in silence. The radio played softly, and the road curved lazily through the outskirts of town, lined with trees that shed their leaves like old memories. Miriam rolled down the window and let the wind tangle her hair. You always did drive too carefully, she said with a small smile. Even when you were young. I was afraid of crashing, I replied. She looked at me, her expression thoughtful. Sometimes being too careful makes you miss the view. Her words weren't about driving, they never were. We stopped at a small park, the kind of place only locals knew about, where the grass was still wet from morning dew. She stepped out, stretching her arms wide like she was claiming the day for herself. I followed, unsure of why my heart was racing. Do you ever feel like your life took a turn you didn't choose? She asked suddenly. All the time, I said quietly. Sometimes I think I just ended up in a version of life I never planned. I did everything right. Studied, married, worked hard, but I can't tell if I'm happy or just surviving. She nodded, looking toward the lake. That's what I mean. People confuse peace with stillness. Peace is when your heart is at ease. Stillness is when you've given up moving. I didn't know what to say. I just stood there, listening to the water ripple against the stones. Miriam always had a way of making silence feel like part of the conversation. Then she turned to me, her voice softer. You shouldn't feel guilty for wanting to feel alive again. Everyone deserves that. I looked at her, startled. Do you mean? She cut me off gently. I mean that emotional hunger isn't a sin. It's human. We just have to decide how we feed it. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The weight of her words settled deep. It wasn't about desire, it was about being seen. About finding someone who understood what it felt like to carry invisible emptiness. She walked a few steps ahead, then turned back to me. You have a good heart, she said. Don't let loneliness convince you otherwise. Her kindness hurt more than judgment ever could. It made me realize how starved I'd become for genuine connection, the kind that doesn't demand, doesn't accuse, just understands. When we drove back home, the silence between us was different. It wasn't tense or uncomfortable. It was full of what neither of us dared to say out loud. Lisa met us at the door, cheerful as ever, asking about our walk. I smiled, said it was nice, and avoided her eyes. Because if she looked closely enough, she might have seen what I was still trying to hide. Not love, not betrayal, but the faint, dangerous warmth of being truly seen for the first time in years. That night, I couldn't sleep again. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Miriam's face reflected in that morning light, calm, knowing, and quietly powerful. She wasn't trying to take anything from me. She was teaching me something I didn't yet understand, that sometimes the greatest infidelity isn't physical, but emotional. And it begins the moment you realize your heart beats louder in someone else's presence than it does at home. By the time the weekend reached its end, the house had begun to feel different. It wasn't just that Miriam's laughter filled the spaces that had long been silent, it was that her presence made everyone else seem more alive. Everyone but me, because inside, I was coming apart. Lisa was busy packing leftovers for Miriam's journey home, humming softly in the kitchen. My mother moved between rooms, checking lists, trying to hold on to a sense of order. I stood in the doorway, watching Miriam fold her shawl with that deliberate grace she had, every movement calm, unhurried. She seemed untouched by the whirlwind she had caused in me. Leaving already? I asked, my voice lower than I intended. She looked up, eyes soft but steady. It's time. You know how families are, too much of me and everyone starts wondering what I'm really doing here. It was meant as a joke, but something in her tone carried weight. She was protecting herself, and maybe me too. When the others went out to load the car, she lingered in the living room, tracing her fingers across the photo frame on the shelf, a picture of my wedding day. You looked so sure then, she said quietly. So certain that love could fix anything. It's supposed to, I replied. That's what we're told, isn't it? Miriam turned to face me. Love can heal, but only if it's honest. The kind most people build their lives around is just fear wearing a pretty mask. I wanted to argue, to defend what I had, but the words never came. Because she was right. I had been living in routine, calling it stability, living in silence, calling it peace. She stepped closer, her expression unreadable. You don't owe me anything, she said softly. But don't go back to sleep after I leave. You've started to wake up. Don't waste that. Her words pierced me in a way that felt both tender and cruel. I could feel everything I'd been holding back, the confusion, the guilt, the ache of being understood too deeply. Miriam, I began, but the rest of the sentence dissolved. There was nothing I could ask her to stay for. Nothing that would make sense to anyone but the two of us. She smiled faintly, almost sadly. We both know what this is. It's not an affair. It's recognition. Two lonely hearts realizing they still work. The sound of car doors outside broke the moment. My wife called out that it was time. Miriam took one last look around the room, then at me. Her hand brushed mine, not deliberate, not accidental, just enough to say I know. And then she was gone. I watched from the porch as the car disappeared down the road. The silence she left behind felt heavier than her presence ever had. That night, I sat alone in the living room, staring at the empty cup she'd used that morning. I thought about everything she'd said, about honesty, about peace, about pretending. For the first time in years, I wanted to tell Lisa the truth, not about Miriam, but about myself. About how tired I was of being invisible in my own life. But when Lisa came in, smiling, asking if I wanted tea, I just nodded. Because sometimes truth feels too fragile to survive the wrong moment. As she walked away, I whispered a goodbye, to Miriam, to the man I had been, to the quiet that had once felt like safety. And in that whisper, I understood that her simple game had never been about secrets or confessions. It had been a mirror. And what I saw in it would change everything I believed about love and family. It's been weeks since Miriam left, yet some mornings I still hear her laughter in the kitchen, as if it lingers in the walls. It's strange how a few days can leave an imprint that years of routine never did. She didn't just visit, she rearranged the quiet corners of my life and taught me to see what I'd stopped noticing. Life went back to its rhythm. Lisa returned to her usual schedule, and I slipped into mine. The world didn't change, but I did. The silence between us still existed, but now it wasn't empty, it was honest. I had stopped pretending that everything was fine. And that honesty, in a way, was its own kind of healing. One evening, as we sat on the couch watching the news, Lisa asked me something she hadn't asked in a long time. "Are you happy?" The question startled me, not because I didn't know the answer, but because it came from her, the woman I'd quietly drifted away from without either of us realizing it. I didn't respond right away. I just looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the fatigue in her eyes, the quiet hope that maybe we could find each other again. "I'm trying to be," I finally said. "But I think I forgot what that means." She nodded, her gaze soft. Maybe we both did. That night, we talked, really talked, for the first time in years. There were no games, no filters, no pretending. Just two people sitting in their shared truth. We spoke about the distance, the quiet, the exhaustion that had made us strangers in the same house. It wasn't easy. Some words hurt, some silences were heavier than others. But for the first time, I felt like we were building something real again, something that didn't depend on denial. In the days that followed, I found myself writing more, not to Miriam but about her. About what her visit had awakened in me. She had reminded me that honesty, no matter how uncomfortable, is the only thing that keeps relationships alive. That connection isn't about perfection, but about presence. One afternoon, I received a letter. No return address, just my name written in familiar, looping handwriting. Inside was a single line. "Remember, truth isn't meant to destroy. It's meant to set free." There was no signature, but I didn't need one. I folded the letter carefully and placed it inside the same photo album she'd once held. It felt right, like she was still part of the story, but no longer the center of it. Weeks turned into months, and something beautiful began to grow in my home again. Laughter, small gestures, a shared tenderness that had been absent for too long. Lisa and I started walking together in the evenings, talking about things that weren't just schedules and bills. She began smiling more, and for the first time in years, I felt a quiet sense of belonging. Miriam's simple game had started as curiosity, maybe even mischief. But it had become a mirror, one that showed us all the cracks we'd hidden behind smiles. Her visit wasn't about temptation. It was about truth, and truth, I've learned, doesn't always come gently. It arrives disguised as discomfort, as a conversation you don't want to have, as a feeling you can't explain. But once it's here, you can't unsee it, and maybe that's the point. I don't know if I'll ever see her again. Maybe our paths were meant to cross only once, just long enough for her to remind me that love, in all its forms, is not about possession but understanding. Every now and then, when the house is quiet and the wind moves through the curtains just right, I think of that night on the porch, the questions, the laughter, the courage it took to speak truthfully. And I whisper a silent thank you. Not because she changed my life, but because she helped me remember how to live it. And that, I suppose, is what family truly means. Sometimes, the lessons that change us don't come wrapped in comfort, they come disguised as people who make us see ourselves clearly for the first time. Miriam's visit wasn't a scandal, it was a revelation. Her simple game taught me that love isn't about control, and family isn't about pretending everything's fine. It's about truth, the kind that hurts, heals, and ultimately sets us free. If you've ever had someone walk into your life and quietly change how you see everything, then you already know what this story means. It's not about betrayal, it's about rediscovery, about learning that the heart can find its way home, no matter how far it's wandered. Speech balloon, tell me in the comments, what does truth mean to you in a relationship? TV, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more deeply emotional, real-life infidelity stories that reveal the human side of love, loss, and redemption. Bell, every story is a mirror. Sometimes, all it takes is one to recognize yourself again. This story is a fictionalized account inspired by real-life experiences, shared for emotional reflection and mature audiences only. All names, places, and identifying details have been changed or omitted to protect privacy. The purpose of this story is not to promote infidelity, but to explore human emotions, choices, and the lessons that shape our understanding of love and family. Viewer discretion is advised.